Once upon a time, in a town just like yours, there was a sleepy little residential street. And on that street, there were two houses. Well, there were more than two houses. No one builds a street with only two houses. But anyway, those two houses were at the end of the street. In those two houses lived very different people. One house was owned by a family in their early 30s, a husband named Sean, his wife, Kathy, and their 8-year-old son, Bran, whom they named after a Game of Thrones character, not realizing how much they'd hate the show 8 years later, and are now stuck with a kid named after something that helps you shit. The husband was a district manager for a chain of fitness centers, while his wife was a stay-at-home mother, an encyclopedia of neighborhood gossip. The other house was owned by a single 25-year-old woman named Danielle. And how does a person so young manage to own their very own house? Why, through the lucrative world of sex work. Danielle was an escort, charging upwards of $250 an hour for her services, while also maintaining an OnlyFans page that her Twitter account claimed was in the top 1.4%. Suffice to say, Kathy did not like having Danielle as a neighbor, often telling her husband, and any neighbor who would listen, "Having a hooker in the neighborhood will destroy our property values." Danielle knew that Kathy didn't like her, but didn't really care. She was too busy having sex with unsatisfied married men for money or taking pictures of herself naked and tied up to her bed, which is really difficult and potentially dangerous when you live alone. And so, in this town just like yours, a global pandemic very similar to the one we're experiencing in 2020 hit, causing many businesses to close, some of them never to reopen. But they wouldn't know that just yet because the government said they'd probably just be closed for 2 weeks instead of setting more realistic expectations based on what was already happening around the world. This included all of the gyms that Sean was responsible for, and so Sean was laid off until further notice. And as the year continued on, money got tighter and tighter, which is possibly the opposite of what was happening to Danielle. Anyway, one day in early December, Kathy and Danielle happened to be at the same grocery store. Kathy, who had to cut back on makeup and hair appointments, which didn't really matter since everyone was wearing masks and kinda looked like shit anyway, was trying to figure out which bag of pasta was the better bargain when Danielle came by. "Hi, neighbor," Danielle gleefully greeted her. "How are you?" "How am I?" Kathy snapped, scowling under her mask. "My husband still hasn't been called back to his job. He works nights stocking shelves at this very grocery store for minimum wage, just so we don't lose the house. And you of all people have the nerve to ask me how I'm doing? He works hard his whole life to provide for his family, and you make all your money without ever having to even get off your back." "Hey, that's not true," Danielle replied. "Sometimes I'm also on my knees." Yeah, it's all just a joke," Kathy said. "You know what's really funny? I have to explain to my 8-year-old child why he's not getting anything for Christmas this year. That is not because Santa thought he was bad, but because the world's just not fair." As Kathy stormed off, Danielle felt conflicted. She wanted to tell Kathy to go fuck herself, much like she'd done last night on camera for a guy who paid $500 for a video of her screaming his name while she did it. That it wasn't her fault that her husband got laid off, and that maybe Kathy should consider getting a job to help the family. But she did feel bad for their kid, as she herself remembered having some pretty shitty Christmases because her family was poor, and it always felt awful going to school and hearing about all the great things her friends got for Christmas while she got new socks and a bag of hair ties. And so, Danielle went shopping. She thought, what would an 8-year-old boy like? And as most of her clients, and the simps who would send photos of themselves to her, were emotionally 8 years old, she took inspiration from the things that they had in their homes. Action figures, Pokemon cards, Marvel movies. She was even able to get a brand new PlayStation 5 from one of the guys on her OnlyFans, trading it for a custom JOI video. She wrapped everything up, and on the evening of the 24th of December, piled everything on the family's doorstep, rang the doorbell, and quickly ran back to her own home as Kathy came to the door, yelled for her husband, and the two looked in bewilderment at the pile of presents on their doorstep. Sean opened the card on top, which read, "Ho, ho, ho from your neighbor, the Ho. I hope your kid has a great Christmas." A few days later, Kathy knocked on the door of Danielle's house. Danielle answered the door, and could tell Kathy was relieved that she was wearing jeans and a t-shirt and not, well, nothing. Kathy looked down at the ground before finding the strength to look Danielle in the eye. So, listen, I just wanted to say, I was wrong about you. You didn't have to do that, and Bran was so happy with all the presents. I don't know how you knew exactly what he'd like, but you really made his Christmas. I'm sorry I judged you the way I did. I always thought sex workers were selfish degenerates, but you've taught me a valuable lesson. Thank you so much. And Bran would say thanks too, but we felt it better to say that the presents were from Santa and, well, not the hooker neighbor. And without letting Danielle say anything, she left. Danielle smiled as she closed the door, thrilled that she was able to give a child the type of Christmas that she never got herself. Plus, it only felt right, since Sean was one of her best customers on OnlyFans, so a lot of the money that she had spent was his to begin with. And so, the moral of the story is that you can change the opinions of even the most stubborn of individuals, as long as they personally benefit in one way or another. Merry Christmas, everyone!